Next up here, we have David Duffett from Telespeak Limited. David served as a worldwide community director for Asterix at Digium. He's been publicly teaching and speaking internationally for more than 25 years. And David is grateful to the geeks that build the technologies he speaks about, and he wants to give back by helping geeks to speak. So the title of his talk is Why Nerds Aren't Heard, 7 Ways Geeks Sabotage Their Own Presentations and What to Do About It. Let's give a big welcome to David Duffett.
Well, thank you very much. It's a great privilege to be here, and I do want to recognise the whole ClueCon team for putting on such an excellent event. It's got such a wonderful family feel, so let's say a big thank you to them. Thank you very much. Top class. Okay, yes, I'd like to talk about why nerds aren't heard. You see, I love technical conferences, and they're great, but it's usually technical people talking to other technical people. And what happens is, when we get out into the real wide world and have to talk to other people, then sometimes technical people aren't as good as they could be at communicating with those less technical people. So that's why we're here. I'd like this to be a fun and interactive presentation, and so I have 2 snack monitors with me. We've got Abby with the chocolate snacks, and we've got Madison with the fruit-based snacks. And if you happen to answer a question during this presentation, or even ask a question during this presentation, you will get the opportunity to pick a snack, and one of the ladies will bring you a snack. Does that sound okay? Good. Okay, I'm glad that sounds okay. So let's identify the problem. Then we'll talk about why nerds need to be heard. I've boiled it down to 7 ways that geeks sabotage their own presentations, and I've identified some power presenting protocols that we can all use as geeks in order to speak to less technical audiences and still make ourselves heard properly. So before we do that, though, I do like to do a little test on audiences from time to time. You may have seen this before, so if you have, play along. All you have to do is just pop your hands together in front of you like that. Can you all do that? And you'll notice that one of your thumbs is closer to you than the other. If they're equidistant, there's probably something not quite right about you. Okay, but if you've got left or right, who's the left-hand people? Okay, put your hands up if you're left-hand people. Have a look at those people, because they are the cool people in the audience, the real cool people. Yes, okay, and who with the right thumb? Keep your hands up there. Have a good look round, because they think they're the cool people in the audience. Okay. But fortunately, this talk does apply to both groups, I'm pleased to say. So let's look at that problem. The problem is this. It's all very well being a geek. In fact, it can be excellent being a geek. You get your own corner of the office. Maybe it's a little bit darker than other people's parts of the office. Maybe people don't come and talk to you very often. Maybe you get to wear the cool T-shirts. You know, that particular one, you can't read it easily, but it says, I'm not slacking off, my code's compiling. You know, so you get the cool, trendy T-shirts. There's even Think Geek, isn't there, where you can go and buy the trendy T-shirts to wear. However, even though the boss might buy you pizza on a Friday from time to time, what happens is round the corner, there's the sales guy. And by the way, I know Ron Burgundy is not a sales guy. He's like an anchor man, isn't he? But I'm just using him for representation. He's round the corner, got his big expense BMW SUV. And having worked in quite a few tech companies, I thought to myself, well, hang on a minute. Who are the people that actually, hold on, I've got to go a bit closer. Who are the people that actually make and support this stuff? It's the geeks, isn't it? The geeks create it, and then these other people go and make huge amounts of money, often more than the geeks that created and supported the stuff in the first place. And I thought, this is a situation I would like to resolve. And it's not that the salespeople get paid excessively. I think salespeople are very, very important. Sales and marketing are 2 of the most important functions in the company, because if you don't have sales and marketing, it's a little bit like winking in the dark. You know you're doing it, but nobody else does. So you need that kind of function. However, what I wanted was for geeks to be able to be more in themselves, and if they are more, they can do more, and if they do more, they can have more success. It was geek success that I was wanting. And so what I did was build some protocols. And the reason for it is because when you get out and do these presentations, the non-tech presentations that you do are often more important than some of the technical ones. And the reason is that it could be a job interview. It could be showing your non-tech colleagues in the office the kind of things you do. It could also be sales presentations. And, as we've already heard, attracting funding or selling the company. These are all very important presentations when I would submit to you that the decision makers may not be the most technical people. And so instead of an audience like this where your technicalness is your credibility, you're out in front of an audience that doesn't necessarily get it. So, let's see what we can do. Because a geek that can really speak, that multi-dimensional geek that's able to nail their presentation, can be successful not only in their presentations to non-tech audiences, but also into so many other areas of their lives. Because the confidence that you gain by being a reasonably good speaker will rub off into other areas of your life and so make you more confident and more successful. Okay, has anybody ever seen a picture like this? The buffering picture that you get on YouTube. Abby has. I can't believe you're the only one, Abby. I'm sure more people. And Madison has. There's a few. Okay. It's symptomatic of a bad connection, isn't it? And what I would suggest is that as technical people, we often go in front of an audience and we don't make a good enough connection with them to get our point across. And so your broadband connection at home is a kind of representation of the way you speak to your audience, or you can see it the other way around. If you fail to make a connection with your audience, you won't be able to get the information through. You'll effectively be kind of buffering towards your audience, and just as importantly, they might be buffering coming back to you, because you need to read their faces, and you need to know what they're thinking about your presentation, a bit like I am now. Start the car. Okay, let's have a look. Right, this all comes from a book that I'm writing. I'm kind of halfway through it. I'd hoped to have it finished by this very presentation, but other things got in the way, like, doing a job, making money, all that kind of stuff. And so I just brought the fleeces along. And by the way, some inside information on the fleeces. I gave you 3. There's an L, an XL, and a 2XL. So the gentleman already won one. He can have whichever one, and then, the choice will get less as the time progresses. Okay, so what about these protocols? Would it surprise you to learn that they all begin with a P? The first one is purpose. You've got to, as Stephen Covey, the author of 7 Habits of Highly Effective People, said, you've got to begin with the end in mind. When you come to do a presentation, what's the normal thing that a geek does when they're asked to do a presentation? Any ideas? Normal thing that happens. The boss says to the geek, you've got to do a presentation. What happens first?
Panic.
Where was the panic man? That man. Chocolate or fruit, sir? Chocolate prize. Yeah, there is panic, but the stereotypical thing is they get on PowerPoint or Keynote or whatever, and they start hacking on the slides. And really, the slides are not the presentation, are they? The slides are a visual aid to the presentation. I would submit to you that our first thing to do is actually to think about the purpose, the outcome of the presentation we want, but across the 3 parties involved. The 3 parties are you, the presenter, the person that asked you to do the presentation, the sponsor, and then the audience themselves. The audience. Do you see what I did there? Audience. Made that nice connection. Anyway, those 3 all come together into a thing that I would call the learning contract, where you specify the purpose of your presentation. The next thing you want is a plan. And a plan for your presentation is very important. I don't mean the slides again. I mean a plan where you start thinking about how your audience gets stuff into their memories. There's 5 keys to the memories. There's firsts, lasts, links to what you already know, repetition, and outstanding things. Let me explain. You probably remember the first day in the job you do now. You probably remember the last day. Well, hopefully not the last day of a job you know. You know what I mean. But you don't tend to remember the days in between. The posh name for this is primacy and recency. You remember the beginning of the movie and the end of the movie. You don't necessarily remember everything in between. This is why when you watch the news, you get the headlines at the beginning, you get the stories, and then you get the roundup at the end, don't you? It's the key information. So when you're planning your presentation, you need to create spaces and use the prime time of those spaces with your audience's attention span. Then we've got to prepare the presentation. And again, I still don't mean the slides. I mean preparing the presentation and putting things into their logical spaces, but also walking in your customer's shoes. Very, very important. I'll come back to that a little bit later. Then practice. You know what geeks are like for practicing? They just don't do it, do they? Well, if they do what they're in their hotel room the morning of their presentation or on the aeroplane over, and the practice really amounts to looking at the slides and thinking, yeah, I'll say that when that slide pops up. That, my friends, is not practice. Really, you need to practice out loud, and I'll go on to more of that a little bit later. Then there's the participation. Participation is absolutely key in any presentation. And then there's the performance. There's when you actually deliver the presentation. And we have to talk about the fact that some people get nerves when there's a presentation to be delivered and what to do about that. And the last part, the often forgotten part, is the post-event stuff. In other words, following up after the presentation to make sure that the attitudes have been changed, the learning has taken place, the new skill sets are in place, and what have you. So the trouble I found is that geeks, whether they do it consciously or not, tend to sabotage their own presentations. In other words, they tend to destroy, damage, or obstruct their own effectiveness when it comes to delivering presentations to non-tech people in a number of ways. And there's 7 different ways. The first one is to be way too tech-focused. Way too tech-focused. And that's understandable to a degree because when we're in a room like this, it is all about the tech, for sure. However, when we get out to those job interviews, those funding presentations, all of that kind of stuff, fact of the matter is people don't care how much you know until they know how much you care about them. Because the audience is only tuned into that one radio station. It's WIIFM. What's in it for me? It's the relevance to their own situation. And so the chances are that you dive in with all your tech stuff, you kind of feature dump all over people and give them all these different lines of code and all that kind of stuff. And what you should really do is come up at least one technical level. Maybe even more, maybe kind of come up 2 technical levels to what you think. And the reason for that is you're then not going to lose the people that don't understand the technicalities. Meanwhile, the people that do have the technicalities and have the questions, they can ask you the questions and you can answer them because you know the answers, but it means you're not losing other people along the way. You want to take people with you on a presentational journey. So don't be too tech-focused. Come up a little bit. Next one is the no proper planning. People tend to avoid planning their presentations properly because they just start hacking on the slides. And the FBI have the 6 Ps, don't they? Proper planning prevents particularly poor performance. That's a slightly cleaned up version to the one I heard, but I like to do a family-friendly show, if you know what I mean. Okay, the ideas to consider are your content and structure, putting the right things in the right places, and, of course, the keys to people's memories. I mentioned first and last. I also said links to what people already know. And this is the power of the analogy. You know, when some people understand one thing, but you want to help them to understand a new thing, you relate to what they already know. And just a classical example, just by way of an illustration, is when you're talking about Ohm's law and current passing through an electronic circuit, you can liken it to a hose pipe. Water passing through a hose pipe. And you know, if you step on the hose pipe, it's going to restrict the flow of the water. Likewise, resistance restricts the flow of electricity. And so you can use the power of the analogy. That's a link to what somebody already knows. Excuse me. Then there is repetition. You can repeat the key messages throughout your presentation because repetition is the mother of learning. It's also the distant cousin of boredom, so you have to, you know, kind of play it carefully with these things. But repetition is key. And then the last thing is outstanding things that are just so different from the rest of what you're saying that they naturally stand out by themselves. For instance, if I showed you 50 pictures of a holiday I had in Alaska last year, you would remember the first picture, you remember the last picture, you'd remember the links to what you already knew. So if you've already been to Anchorage, you might remember the Anchorage shots. And by the way, there was a guy at ClueCon last year, forget his name now, and I met him in Anchorage a few weeks after I met him here. It's crazy. Anyway, changing the subject, back to the presentation. Then you've got the repetition. So if there was lots of pictures of a particular scene, that would stick in your mind. And then the last one, if they were all landscape scenes, but one of them was a dog riding a bicycle, that would be outstanding. And you would remember that, wouldn't you? So think about the keys to people's memories. Then, this is the classic geek problem, thelastminute.com. Imagine, if you will, that you're on trial for doing something that you didn't really do. I don't know. Maybe it's of a sexual nature. I'm not entirely sure. It could be very, very nasty. And you meet with your legal defence man, the attorney that you've employed, and you say, right, great, what sort of preparation have you done? And he says, actually, I don't tend to do it. I tend to wing it. You know, my best cases are always the ones I wing. You know, I just come in, say what's on the top of my head. It always seems to go very well. You'd be petrified, wouldn't you? You would want somebody to actually have given some thought to what they're going to do, to have planned and prepared your defence. And so it is with presentations, that if it's worth giving, it's worth properly preparing for. And there are so many dimensions to a good presentation. It's not just preparing what you're going to say. It could go right down to getting a room layout for the room that you're going to present in, to make sure it can be blacked out, to make sure that people will be able to see the slides or whatever you're going to use, all of that kind of stuff. So, walk in your customer's shoes. And actually, since I'm in America, I can pass on some great advice from the deep thinker Jack Handey. Have you ever heard of those deep thoughts of Jack Handey? One of the very deep thoughts he gave once was, he said, if you're going to criticize somebody, walk a mile in their shoes first. Because then, when you do criticize them, you'll be a mile away and have their shoes. It's very good advice, isn't it? Very good advice from our friend Jack. Now, you need to walk in your audience shoes. How did they hear about the presentation? What are they going to get from the presentation? Is it going to be easy to find the presentation? All of these are dimensions to preparation. And then, of course, there's the practicing. As software engineers, we love to beta trial our software, don't we? Don't we? Maybe not. Yeah, of course we do. Of course we do. Help yourself to a chocolate there, Abby. Yes, professionals practice until they can't get it wrong, whereas amateurs only practice until they get it right. Think of a football team. How often do they practice for their kind of 90 minutes or 2 hours, or in America, 3 or 4 hours with all those little breaks? All of that kind of stuff. You know, all of those things, they have to practice a lot, don't they? And so, as a presentational person, and by the way, not everybody wants to give presentations, do they? I'm only really talking to people who actually want to get out there and give them. And if your boss ever asks you to give a presentation, you don't want to give it, tell him you don't want to give it, or her you don't want to give it. You don't want to be the person that looks bad, do you? Of course not. You only want to go there if you're sold yourself, and I'll come on to that in a moment. But geeks are happy to test their software. They should test their presentations. They should practice out loud. And when I say practice out loud, that would ideally be to a group of real-life people that ideally know something about it. But if you can't find those, you can find sympathetic people like friends and family and practice your presentation to them. If they're not available, most people have got one of these bad boys. You can practice into your phone and record it, either on audio or video. What are the advantages of practicing a presentation? Can anybody give me one or two? Yes, sir. You can see your level of energy. Chocolate or fruit, sir? Fruit. Madison, if you could give that man a fruit-based prize. Yes, you're quite right. You can see your level of energy. And if you've not got enough energy, you know that you need to manufacture more if you can. And I will come on to that in a moment. Any other advantages of practicing? Yes, sir? You can identify what the duration is. Very, very good, because there's often a time frame to be in, isn't there? Yes, the duration. Chocolate or fruit, sir? Chocolate, please, Abby. Yes, there's lots of different things that the practice will do. You remember I was saying that geeks tend to sit there with their slides and think, oh, I'll say that when that slide comes up. You never find out about the words you're going to stumble over or the phrases that don't make any sense until you practice it out loud. So I really encourage you to do that. Next. Oh, sorry. Yeah, the idea was practice out loud. Now, here's a big thing. Participation. How many geeks have you seen do presentations and they leave out the... What do geeks tend to leave out in the presentation? Pictures, content. What about you guys? Interaction. Begins with an A, sir. Begins with an A. The audience. Who said audience? It was that man. Chocolate or fruit, sir? Fruit. Fruit, please, Madison. Yes, that's right. Geeks tend to leave out the audience. They want to do the presentation to the people rather than with the people. And participation is absolutely crucial for engagement. It can take many forms. It doesn't have to be questions and answers. It could be raising of hands and stuff like that. Actually, I saw an amazing presentation a few weeks ago. The guy came out on stage and he said, listen, he said, if you believe in telekinesis, raise my hand, which I thought was really good. And as he was talking, he went, you, stop that. It's pretty good. But participation is crucial to any great presentation. Doesn't have to be questions, but it can. If you are going to ask questions, 2 rules. Make sure you look at people. So they know that you're talking to them. But 2, want the answer. It's no good asking for questions and not wanting the answers. You've actually got to interact properly here. And showing of hands, we've done a little bit of that. Involvement in demonstrations, asking people for their personal experience by contribution of stories and stuff like that. In short, participation is so important that I would actually carve out some time well ahead of you ever delivering the presentation to brainstorm the kind of participation methods you can use in your presentation. It's that important. That's the 5th way that Geeks sabotage their own presentation. The 6th way is by not actually being that enthusiastic, and apathy is quite catching. So the IASM of enthusiasm actually stands for, it's been scientifically proven, I am sold myself. So the gentleman was talking about energy levels. Make sure if you're going to give a presentation, you believe in it and that you are sold yourself so that you can do the best job. If you can't, go back to the person that asked you and say, actually, it's a great idea to give that presentation, but maybe I'm not the best person to give it. We've got to think about the corporate good here, haven't we? So you need to be sold yourself. Attitudes are catching, and if you're apathetic, your audience will catch the apathy. On the other hand, if you're enthusiastic, your audience can catch that too. Deal with your nerves. If you're going to have butterflies, get them to fly in formation to make that perfect presentation. And if you are uneasy, you're going to make your audience uneasy. So you have to be very, very careful. Things that you can use to demonstrate your energy is messing around with the pitch of your voice, the pace of your delivery, and using pauses. All of these can add to the dramatic and energetic effect of the talk you're giving. And here's the idea. Check yourself. Think about, how am I going to appear when I deliver this presentation? Am I going to be sold myself? Have I got the right levels of energy to transmit to my audience? And the 7th way is failure to follow up. So geeks often forget about talking with the people they did the presentation for. How did it go? It's one thing to kind of use those happy sheets where people score it out of 5 or 6 or whatever it is. By the way, interestingly, if you score out of 6, it pushes people to one side or the other. If you score out of 5, they can always go in the middle, can't they? I like 6s myself. Anyway, that's just to put your money away. I'm including that in the ticket price, okay? 5s and 6s. What learning was achieved? Measure it not only immediately after the event, but sometime after the event. Go back to see the person that asked you to do the presentation in the first place and discuss it with them. Find out whether more presentations are needed. Is it the same presentation you've already done to another audience? Is it a different presentation to the same audience to give them some additional information? All of this is of crucial importance. So schedule your follow-up at the very beginning of the presentation. Okay, so I talked about being able to make that magical connection with your audience so that your information gets through and you don't have this kind of virtual buffering where you're looking at the people and you don't know whether they're liking the presentation or understanding the presentation. So here's the magical factor. If you rearrange just slightly these different protocols, remember, you've got to know your purpose. You want to get into planning and preparation. You definitely need to practice. You must always build in some levels of participation so that you're doing the presentation with your audience and not to your audience. You need to check your performance and deal with your nerves. And remember the post-event. When you line it all up right, you get the magical factor or rapport. Rapport, ladies and gentlemen, is your connection with your audience. This is how you're creating your great connection, your massive broadband channel, your massive 250 gig bi-directional channel rather than your puny little ADSL thing. You really need to work on that to get maximum audience reaction and integration. So I've got literally 1.5 minutes. I will take 1 or 2 questions before I summarize, if there are any. Who'd like to kick off with the first?
First of all, a big round of applause for David.
Thank you very much. I will be summarizing in a moment. Yes,
and
go ahead.
we have a question in the front. Go ahead.
It's Madison.
Is there one person that you always go to and practice your talk in front of?
That's a very good question. In my family, there are very few people that, and I mean, I don't consider myself the most technical person, but when I was doing lots of asterisk talks, there are very few people that understood those things. So I would tend to do it to more industry colleagues than actual family members. So people that understood what was going on. Yeah, chocolate or fruit?
The question was, who does he practice his talks to?
Thank you.
Just a quick question on that. Which parts of your presentations do you think it's most important to practice? Anybody have an idea? Which bit of your presentation or parts? Well, all of it's a very good answer. Chocolate or fruit? Fruit, to the man in the red T-shirt. The answer is the beginning and the ending. Those are the crucial parts. And actually, dealing with nerves, the beginning of the presentation is often the part where people get most tongue-tied and a little bit, afflicted. So practicing the beginning of your presentation is an excellent idea, so that when you come out, if you are struck with a few little nerves, you can kind of go on autopilot and fly into the beginning of that presentation. Okay, any other questions? Or shall we summarize?
I think we saw another question here. Was there another one?
Yes, sir. Way, what a great question. I'd just like to say, I've never met that man before. No money has changed hands. Okay. Yes, I will give the slides to the organisers so they can make it freely available to everybody. Yes, fruit or chocolate, sir? Fruit, please, Abby, to the gentleman in the kind of beigey. Oh, sorry. Okay. Yeah. When I summarise, I will have the URL for where you can get more information. The book is not finished, but I expect it to be finished in the next couple of months. Okay, let's just summarise. So, remember, geeks that can speak really rock. They get additional dimensions to their lives, and the confidence they build up in public speaking rubs off into other areas. They're generally more successful. If you can avoid the pitfalls I've outlined, then you will be able to be a geek that can speak by remembering these protocols. And remember, the rewards are here for you to take. And you don't have to be a mile in front of everybody else to win the race, do you? You have to be a yard in front, or an inch in front, or if you're in Europe, a centimetre in front. You just have to be a bit in front to stand out in the crowd. Why fit in when you were born to stand out? Okay, so there is the URL for the gentleman that was asking. If you go to this URL, you can download a free report, and that free report catalogues 7 ways that nerds aren't heard and what to do about it. And you will also get on the mailing list so that when the book does come out in the next couple of months, you will be informed about it and able to participate. So, it's been a pleasure telling you about the bounteous rewards that there are being a geek that can speak. It's been a pleasure to explain some of the advantages you can get by being one. But, most importantly, it will be a pleasure for you when you use the protocols to avoid the pitfalls, and you get all the rewards of being a geek that can speak. Thank you.